Hello and welcome to Coast AM's official YouTube channel. I'm your host, George Norrie. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel. And you can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and of course, on coasttocoastam.com. What has been going on Mars? Dr. John Brandenburg back on Coast to Coast. Death on Mars next on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast, George Norrie with you. We have an amazing couple hours of riveting Coast to Coast radio for you. Dr. John Brandenburg, plasma physicist. Now, did his graduate work in California at the Lawrence Livermore National Lab. You've heard us talk about that, in controlled plasmas for fusion power. He's worked in defense, energy, space research. Dr. Brandenburg, also part of the Clementine mission to the moon, which discovered water at the moon's poles, an amazing discovery. Also, the focus of his scientific career has been to complete the great effort of Einstein to unify the two long-range forces of nature, gravity, electromagnetism. Here he is back on Coast to Coast. John, it's good to have you.
Oh, great to be back, George.
I'm
great honor.
Looking forward to this. You know what? We learn things from you every time you're on. So it's beyond just a great interview that you give us. It's like going back to school.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, George.
When you talk about you're a plasma physicist, explain that to us.
Plasma is the fourth state of matter. It's the stuff that stars are made out of. It's electrified gas where the electrons and nuclei have been torn away from each other. So it glows, it conducts electricity, and most of the matter in the universe is in the plasma state. So when I became a plasma physicist, I decided I had a license to investigate everything.
Well, it works. I am amazed every day now. We're picking up new stories about the universe and some of the marvels that are out there, either discoveries made with our high technology, like the Kepler telescope, or just other things that scientists are developing. But the one thing, John, I'm convinced of, and I was convinced of this since I was a little boy in science class, is that the principles of our solar system are the same all over the place.
Yes.
How close am I to that?
Oh, I think you hit it right on the nail right on the head. The big principle for doing research in the cosmos is what's called the principle of mediocrity, which says basically that the Earth and its people are typical of the universe. We're not the center of the universe. We're basically just like grains of sand on a seashore, with thousands of other grains of sand. And this is a little...
Oh.
Right.
I don't know. Do you have call waiting by any chance? If not, we're dropping you a little bit on the lines.
Oh, you are? Oh, no, I'm fine.
You are? Okay.
Okay, how about this?
Yeah, you're fine. You just dropped out for a few seconds. I just want to make sure it's not our equipment. If it is, I'll have Tom call you back on another line, John, just to be on the safe side. But
sure.
This primordial soup that's out there, with what you just said, that there's probably life out there and everything else. Yes. If you can jumpstart a civilization, the universe is about 14 billion years old. We're 4.5 billion. We're babies in the universe. If there's an area that started, let's say, 2 billion years before us with the same complexity, a planet that's close to its sun, not too far, not too close, I think life is going to evolve there. It starts there. It evolves. And so if you give a civilization, let's say, 1 billion years head start, assuming they haven't exploited themselves and they've wiped themselves out, how much technology would you have 1 billion years ahead of where we are today?
Well, it's hard to imagine, but also remember that some societies, even once they gain a lot of technology, tend to stagnate. Necessity tends to be the mother of invention. And so I can conceive of a civilization that perhaps attains space travel, warp drive perhaps, and then kind of just topped out there. Maybe they didn't go much farther than that. But it's a very interesting question about the sociology of societies that are far more advanced than ourselves.
I mean, look what we've done, John, in 100 years.
Yes.
It's just absolutely amazing. Look what we've done since we landed on the moon in 1969. I mean, we've just jump-started civilization 10,000 years at the same knowledge of progression.
Yes.
Man, it's amazing what they're doing. I think they've learned how to travel in space.
Oh, absolutely. I'm convinced we're not the only intelligent people in the universe, and I know we're not the only people who have space travel. I'm just convinced of that.
Assuming you were a witness to these other extraterrestrials on systems way, way out there, what would they have said about our solar system? And let's assume we were 1,400 light years away from them. So they find us with their Kepler-type telescope, and maybe they have even better technology. But what do they say about Earth way back there?
Well, they would probably, if they kept watching us, as we're going to keep watching this new planet we've discovered, they'd notice that it had oxygen in the atmosphere and a lot of water. That's what they would conclude about Earth. They
wouldn't know if there was life there, or could they? Would there be equipment that would give them that?
The oxygen in the atmosphere is basically a sign of life.
Okay.
Because oxygen doesn't really occur free in nature unless there's photosynthesis.
Okay.
It's a very reactive gas. So the presence of oxygen is in itself a very strong indication of life.
I'm still trying to figure out, John, who the heck we are and why we're here. Outside of the religious applications.
Yes.
We move those out, it becomes a puzzlement, doesn't it?
Well, I think we're just a manifestation of the potential of the universe to create life and intelligence. And I think that this leads to another thing, what is intelligent life in the rest of the universe? What is it like? Well, assuming mediocrity, which is the founding principle of SETI, if you want to know what the rest of the universe's intelligent life is probably like, turn on the news. And I don't want to shock you.
Exactly. There's no doubt about that.
But you see positive things on the news, too, George, in addition to negative.
They do. They don't run them a lot, but there are some incredibly positive stories. We have this little tragedy where this woman in China got sucked up by an escalator.
That's so terrible.
But she saved her 2-year-old. She was a hero.
She was.
But, John, stay with us. We're going to take a quick break, and we're going to come back. John's website's, of course, linked up at coasttocoastam.com. He's got a couple home run books, too. One is called Life and Death on Mars. The other is Death on Mars. And we're going to get involved in both of those with a couple incredible theories that he has on just what might have happened on Mars. And wait till you hear what it is. Wait till you hear what it is. And if you need to email me, that's George at coasttocoastam.com. And also, don't forget to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and everybody, if you have a smartphone, grab our free apps in your respective app stores. Just put Coast to Coast in there, coasttocoastam.com in there, and the app will pop up. Whether you're in your iPhone store or your Android store, just grab those. We're going to come back in a moment with Dr. John Brandenburg next on Coast to Coast AM. And we're with Dr. John Brandenburg, and wait till we get into some of the things he's been working on. That's just ahead on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you. Dr. John Brandenburg with us, too. And one of his works is called Death on Mars, The Discovery of a Planetary Nuclear Massacre. John, what does that mean?
Basically, we've been looking at the data for a long time, including the most recent data from Mars, gathered by our latest space probes. And this is a follow-up to an investigation that began in 1984 with the original Cydonia investigations, started by Vince DiPietro and Greg Molinar. And basically, we have now found there is evidence of 2 massive nuclear explosions on Mars that occurred above the Martian surface. They were airbursts. They made large areas of the Martian surface into glass. They seeded it with radioactive byproducts that are still visible from space. If you we orbited gamma ray spectrometers around Mars on the Mars Surveyor, and found these hot spots of radioactivity, and it leaves a global pattern. Obviously, the explosions were so powerful, the shock waves wrapped all the way around the planet and collided on the far side of the planet. And the two areas correlate with two areas of what we found was archaeology on Mars, Cydonia Mensa and a place called Galaxis Chaos.
Are you saying what I think you're saying about these explosions?
Yes. It appears that someone attacked Mars with massive nuclear weapons. Jeez. We're talking nuclear weapons as big as the Empire State Building.
My God. What would be on Mars to attack at that time?
People ask, why do you connect this with Cydonia and Galaxis Chaos, where there's another face on Mars? I said, I can read a map. The nuclear explosion epicenters appear correlated with the two centers of what look like archaeology on Mars, Cydonia Mensa and Galaxis Chaos, which is in the Utopia region of Mars. And because of the prevailing winds, winds patterns on Mars are the same as on Earth. They blow from the to the southeast. The explosions were to the northwest of both areas and would carry all the shock, the most powerful shock wave, and the fallout, radioactive fallout over Cydonia Mensa. We're talking explosions so powerful, though, that they would have ripped the entire atmosphere off of Mars. This was complete overkill.
This was obliteration, wasn't it?
This was obliteration. Whoever did this apparently was targeting something on Mars at Cydonia Mensa and Galaxis Chaos, but wanted the planet to be totally sterilized afterwards. They wanted to make sure that Mars never rose again.
Might there have been, this is speculation, of course.
Sure.
Might there have been massive civilizations on Mars at this time, John?
It's certainly possible. The best interpretation I can make, personally, is this looks like the objects of Cydonia Mensa, the D&M pyramid, the face on Mars, and then also the objects found at Galaxis Chaos. And all of this is in the book, including recent pictures of all of this from our newest space probes. This looks like a primitive civilization. We see no evidence of roads, for instance, or airports, anything like that. It looks very much like Bronze Age or Mayan or early Egyptian. So it doesn't look like it was an advanced civilization. Yet there's these evidences of this massive nuclear weapon that would have actually fallen from space.
So, all right, so we're ruling out the possibility that some Mars-based civilization could have launched these.
Yes, it does not. It appears completely inconsistent with what we see at the areas of the archaeology, but also the weapons would have had to have been so large. It would have made no sense to launch them off of Mars to have them detonate in space. It looks like someone just arrived at Mars, discovered what was there, and dropped the bombs from space.
Wow. Now, let's move this over to Earth for a second, John,
Sure.
and talk about Sodom and Gomorrah and also what they have found in the deserts around the Middle East, in India.
Libyan desert.
And that glass there, much
Libyan
like what you just described. Is it conceivable that whoever did this to Mars did it on a smaller scale to Earth?
Well, the reason I hesitate to grab for that scenario is that the stuff on Mars appears to have happened like 500 million years ago. This is very, very ancient. There weren't even dinosaurs on Earth when this happened. It does perhaps correlate with the what's called the Great Permian extinction.
Okay.
Which was where the Earth almost turned into Mars. 90% of everything that was alive, including the entire oceans, died. during the Permian extinction, and I have urged people to look for isotopic anomalies in that. Now, there is the Libyan glass. There's also a place called Mahando Daro in India, where they found a similar type of molten glass. It's called trinitite. It's created by nuclear explosions. So it's possible that nuclear weapons were used on this planet, like 6,000 years ago. But I've confined my researches pretty much to Mars. I view the discoveries of this same kind of melt glass and perhaps isotopic anomalies on Earth as another fascinating aspect of our mysterious cosmos. But on Mars is where we have the data I have been studying, and I have shown this data to nuclear weapons experts, who of course can't be quoted publicly, and they agree with me that this is how the dots connect.
What if, John, there was a visiting civilization on Mars? Let's assume you're absolutely correct that the civilization on Mars was Mayan type. It had that kind of technology, smart, but not quite the technology we have today.
No.
But that there might have been visitors on Mars who had craft, who had technology, and whoever blew them up wanted to get to them.
That's certainly possible. Mars made itself a target of somebody because they were hosting another spacefaring civilization. They got pulled into a quarrel that they had nothing to do with. Whenever you have intelligent life and civilizations, the possibilities become myriad. I mean, we have to go to Mars, George, and land astronauts there, sift through the rubble, and find out as best we can what actually happened up there.
Will they tell us, John? Will they really tell us?
I believe they will, because when we first found this, it was a combination of my work by myself and Vince DiPietro, and we were aware that the government was very interested in our work. We contacted somebody who had actually what we knew to be a government agent and reported all of this to him. Actually, that was at Vince DiPietro's urging. And he took careful notes, went back to wherever he reported to, and came back to us and said, "Why don't you publish this?" It was typical of the intelligence community. They made their answer as a question. Why don't you publish? So I went ahead and started publishing.
Good for you.
And my own belief is that the government probably had an inkling of this because of the presence of a isotope called xenon-129 in very large amounts in the Martian atmosphere. It's a weapon signature. These
weapons could have been launched from almost anywhere.
That's right.
Even outside of our solar system.
That's true. We're obviously talking about, the scenario that appears to agree with what we find is a very primitive civilization on Mars attacked by a very advanced civilization from space. And that's about all we know. We must go up there and go through the rubble at Cydonia and Galaxis Chaos and find out, for one thing, did the Martians know who attacked them?
Yes.
Did they have prior contact with them?
Right. Any warning, any forewarning?
Abducting people and mutilating their cattle on Mars.
Maybe. Now, can we rule out, though, any kind of meteor that might have exploded in the atmosphere? Would that have created the same thing?
Mars is kind of an accident-prone planet. It's right next to the asteroid belt. There is a large late impact, as big as the one that wiped out the dinosaurs on Mars. It's called the Leo impact crater. I had originally thought in my researches that that's what destroyed Mars' climate. but that may have been just another event. Unfortunately, that impact crater is right between Cydonia and Galaxis Chaos, so it would have been. It's almost as if it itself was targeted on the center of the Martian culture, and that there was a Martian culture there. I am absolutely convinced now, based on the latest pictures from Mars, from our latest probes, and in the book I have all the frame numbers so that anyone can go check in the NASA files. All of this data has been made completely available to the public. It's as if the government wants this to be found.
It's just sitting out there.
They've essentially laid all the cards on the table. Well, being the government, they probably have some cards they've kept back, but all the pictures of Cydonia, new pictures of Cydonia, confirming the face that has nostrils in the nose and everything like this. The new pictures from Galaxis Chaos. By the way, NASA came up with that name.
I love that
name. You can't make
name.
this stuff up.
I love that name.
And I know. So it's the government has. We requested new pictures from Galaxis Chaos, and where we'd found what looked like two faces, and there they are.
What would the possibilities be of trying to wipe out a very not too advanced civilization that's on a planet and they're not hurting anybody? They're just existing. Why would you take them out?
All I can say is that human beings have done things like that similarly on this planet.
Talk about evil.
I know. We're talking evil of a almost unimaginable scale. And this is why it was so shocking, and this is why, in fact, I basically studied this data for the last 10 years before I decided to write this book, lay it all out there. I've been to several scientific conferences and presented it. I was most recently at the Lunar Planetary Science Conference, the premier conference on planetary science. I presented the paper as a poster paper for 2 hours. I got a lot of people came up and looked at it, and other planetary scientists, and no one contradicted me. No one said, oh, you got this wrong, or that's because of this, or something like that. Finally, one fellow just said, did they do it to themselves, or did somebody else do it? And I hadn't even mentioned the term aliens or civilization at all. But it was obvious to him that this is
that something
someone had targeted Mars for absolute destruction.
Robert Oppenheimer, the father, of course, of our program, our nuke program, claimed that he basically got somewhat of the idea from ancient India scripts.
Yes.
And, was able to surmise that they had some kind of nuclear weapon, and he developed one too.
That's right.
Is it possible that what they were writing about thousands and thousands of years ago was an episode that occurred not here, when they talk about the wars in heaven, but on Mars?
Well, human culture has always associated Mars with war because of its red color, and it's always been a fascinating planet to people on Earth, and they've always associated it with tragedy. It's and by the way, you can see this on the net. If you look for Kirby Comics, The Face on Mars, in 1957, they came out with a comic book, science fiction.
Precisely, that's right. They almost like they were futurists.
The Face on Mars.
Yeah, they knew more about it than we did then.
Well, and it may be another example of human beings being very prescient.
Mm-hmm.
And knowing things that they can't possibly know through some collective subconscious. So it may be that we've always known that Mars was the site of some massive tragedy.
Or with Dr. John Brandenburg, one of his works, Death on Mars, an incredible story of what might have happened a long, long time ago. How terrible this must have been, the horror that must have happened at the time. I would assume whatever inhabitants might have been on that planet, John, instantly killed?
I would hope they died instantly, but the fallout, we can tell from the by the way, I went to school at a lab that studied controlled nuclear fusion at one end of the lab and hydrogen bombs on the other end of the lab. And I actually worked down in the hydrogen bomb wing on laser fusion, which is trying to miniaturize the hydrogen bomb.
Mm-hmm.
So I was given an informal education in nuclear weapons principles. And basically, a modern hydrogen bomb, they wrap it in uranium and thorium. And the hydrogen bomb reaction, the fusion reaction, releases very powerful neutrons that actually split uranium-238 and thorium. Even though they're normally inert, you can't use them in a nuclear reactor. The fusion neutrons actually split those atoms, double the yield of the weapon by just wrapping it in this big jacket. And it creates an enormous amount of fallout. So the radioactive fallout, radioactive iodine, strontium-90 and everything would have just coated Mars and killed everything.
Jeez. The physicist Enrico Fermi, there's a paradox called Fermi's paradox, which talks about the probability of life in the universe. How does that equate with your research?
Well, Fermi's paradox is a big problem for all of us who are interested in extraterrestrial life. Fermi was a really smart guy, and he was known to find a critical path through all sorts of data to ask the crucial question. His crucial question was, where the heck are they? Where are all the other people like us that should be out there in the universe? Even based on data he had, he knew the universe should be a very fertile place. There should be lots of noisy, rambunctious civilizations like ourselves.
All looking for the same thing.
All looking for the same thing, and instead, everywhere we point, we're fairly young in the universe, as you pointed out, George. We're young. We're only 4.5 billion years old in this solar system. The universe is 12 billion years old. Everywhere we point radio telescopes, we should hear soapbox commercials.
Or some of my old shows. John, stay with us. We're going to come back in a moment. We'll pick it up right from there, and we'll open up the phone lines as we talk with Dr. John Brandenburg, Death on Mars. Thank you for listening to Coast AM on our official YouTube channel. I'm your host, George Norrie, and don't forget to visit the Coast Insider membership area on coasttocoastam.com, where you can access our past, upcoming, and classic shows.